Welcome to The Works. This is Jim and Diane. Appreciate you joining us on this fine day. I guess I should probably talk a little bit about what The Works is, and maybe we'll go into depth later, another episode. But this is our first episode, and the history behind The Works, or at least the idea behind the title or the logo, or I'm not sure what we the thing that this program is it's the works. It's kind of like I envision, the clock, the works of the clock. You don't know that they're there, but they're moving the hands. And what we're trying to do is present what that perspective on conversations are, and what that might mean, or again, bringing conversations and ideas to you.
And there's never a bad idea. It's sussing all these things out and figuring it out how it applies to us and to you and the world in general.
And we'll find out more about us. We'll share that as we get more into this, create more episodes, become a little bit more adept at producing what is a conversation like this, a podcast, a broadcast, I'm not sure. But so we're looking also for input, and we've got a lot of ideas on deck, a lot of other programs I'm hoping that you will all enjoy and participate in. Feedback will be greatly appreciated, as long as it's positive. But today I wanted to talk, or at least the first topic, is something that's been in the news. It's been in the news before. And Diane, who's kind of wears the hat as far as the conversationalists go here, she does more of she's the brains, so she's looked things up. But my point is that lately there's been conversation in the news about generations, and in particular how the media will refer to, or the label of, generations. Of course, we're Generation X. We all know of a few, I'm sure. Mm-hmm. Baby boomers, Gen Z, etc. And what was interesting, and I guess the reason that we wanted to talk about this is I don't necessarily dislike the title, but only recently with your investigation, mm-hmm. What is it? Actually, what Gen X is? And my point is, I think we all should vote on what that label is, but actually not until there's some experience, because again, some of the history behind how these names came about, I was shocked on where Gen X actually came from, right, Diane?
Right. And the other thing too is that we're all led to believe that we've had this moniker of generations forever, when in fact they just started being labeled in 1991.
And that was by who? Wasn't that Tom Brokaw? Or maybe I misunderstood or misheard.
Hold on here a second.
Oh, you're fine. So if I recall, we were talking about this earlier, and we try not to do a lot of preparing, but
right.
At the same time,
no, the Greatest Generation, which is born in 1901 to 1927, there was a
book,
right, and there was a woman that did genealogy studies, and they had called it the GI, instead of the Greatest Generation. It was actually Tom Brokaw that he had written a book, and he called them the Greatest Generation.
That's right.
But all this started in 1991, which just seems crazy to me.
And that's him labeling that generation. And again, what we by definition, generational years are what we're talking about, a group of. And for example, the Greatest Generation, in this case, the ones that I think are our oldest right now amongst us, right? Mm-hmm. They're your parents, that's what 19.
Our parents are the silent generation.
Okay, exactly. So that's give me the lineage. What's the year? 19.
The Greatest Generation was 1901 to 1927. They were the ones that fought in World War II. They came of age during the Roaring '20s. They accomplished a lot. Then the next generation is the silent generation, 1928 to 1945. And those were the ones that came of age during post World War II, and they fought in the Korean War, some of them in Vietnam. And one of the reasons why they're called the silent generation, from what I've read, is that because they were silent during McCarthy era. That doesn't make sense to me. So I'll put a pin in that one because that doesn't make sense to me.
But more importantly, I think what you're not saying is that these labels for these people really came after the
fact. Yeah.
Not like today where
we're trying to label a generation. No, these, this was after we looked at when they were born, when they came of age, what they contributed to society. It was after the fact. We're trying to name generations when we haven't even.
It's like we got lazy. I guess that there's this constant need to be part of a team. We like to be able to call ourselves, hey, we're Gen X. That's cool. But what does that really mean? Now, and there's actually a meaning behind Gen X, and I'm not sure that I like it. But back to your point, that why can we not? And that's what I think I wanted this conversation to start with, and with everyone's help. Maybe we can refine or better define what our generation is. And ours is in particular, our Gen X, but...
Right. I thought that was just a generic thing to call us because, they didn't really care what we did. We were gone all day. We drank out of garden hoses and, parents had to be reminded it's 10 o'clock, where are your kids? So I thought it was just a lazy thing that they called us Gen X, but it was actually a book, Generation X, Tales for an Accelerated Culture by Douglas Coupland.
And I guess the thought there, accelerated, and this is me interpreting. So our generation, what I attribute that to, technology, home video games, right?
MTV.
Cable, MTV,
mm-hmm.
and not the internet, but from our perspective, the things that gave us today's internet and the technology. We suffered through Pong. We got a Nintendo system. We got, like you said, we got MTV. We got a lot of the, what I guess we consider today, not modern, niceties, like, information. Well, hell, the advent of the newspaper went away in our generation, right? So everything became television.
Right.
Everything became, not like a YouTube video because they didn't exist, but it was all about visual media, right? That
right.
So maybe that's why it was the accelerated or at least that's how I interpret that. We were forced into this more technology oriented society. Would
Right.
you say?
Yeah, I think so. We had to figure things out. The previous generation, you had, the Cleaver family, mom and dad, and mom stayed home. And those of us that grew up Gen X, we were the latchkey generation. We had to figure things out. So
there you go. And it's like I've always, we've accepted the fact that, again, baby boomers. I never understood that, but I guess technically the baby boomers, that title or that label comes from the fact that
many babies after World War II.
Gotcha. Right. So here we are again talking about our current or at least our Generation
Mm-hmm.
X. There are others, but the core of this is, why can't we have more of a dynamic name for these generations? Because until you do something, I mean, it doesn't make sense to name. I'm not saying Gen X wasn't, and maybe in hindsight it's great, but it seems to me that we should have, I don't know, not necessarily like a vote, but maybe a standard behind, hey, let's call a generation after they've grown up and they've experienced the world a little bit, and by the age of 30, we can say, hey, look, this group of, and maybe 20 years that's another part, right? Each one of these generational periods are 20 years long, and that
right, 15 to 20 years long. Well, and I don't think waiting until that generation reaches the age of 30, because I didn't, I hadn't accomplished much by age 30. I was a little bit, later to launch because I had a good time.
That'll
But
be another episode.
yeah,
But
allegedly.
to your point though, and it's like we were talking. My siblings are all we're all in the same generation, but I mean, there's no connection I have with them. Not just because family doesn't talk, but it seems to me 20 years is too big. So we're kind of coming around this framework where we shouldn't name the generation, or the placeholder is, hey, it's the 2026s to the 2032s,
Right.
and only 5 years later, or some again. So we have a time frame which I think is too big. We should make it smaller,
Right.
and we also let's label it, but after we've kind of experienced what that generation went through, and another.
Whether it's a collective experience, something that happened in history, technology changes, something significant
exactly.
Instead of just Gen Z,
Gen X,
Gen
exactly.
Alpha. And now we've named a new one, Gen Alpha. It's boggling.
So, and to your example, and here's my answer to that. Our kids, one of the things that I think that I will always attribute their standing in society, I'm not judging good or bad, but COVID. And I'm talking to those COVID kids that were in high school or getting ready to graduate high school or college. And for those 18 months that we couldn't be around anyone.
Right. The formative years where you get your first job, you deal with people in person. Instead, we have these young adults now that don't know how to deal with differences. That, everybody's a keyboard jockey. They can say what they want and not have to deal with the face-to-face ramifications of it.
So, to your point, I think that's why. What is that generation technically now called?
Those are Gen Z.
So I think that slice between 2020 and 2023, I think we should call them COVID generation.
Yeah.
Or what was the other COVID, or what was the other name we called COVID? And it just escapes me. It's something 19. Well, no, it was COVID-19, right?
Yeah.
Okay. But yeah, that's the idea of, to your point, if we are able to better assess and even narrow the time frame down, I think that gives more meaning to that group. And I think in general, when like I said, starting the conversation today in the media, we learned some story about Gen X, or I don't even know what it was. What does that mean? Who are they really talking to? I'm still. That's what baffles. It lands on me because that's the label that we got for ourselves.
Right.
But it doesn't necessarily. Well, like I said, I don't know that it necessarily hits the same way. And again, the meaning behind Gen X and Gen Y.
Well, and you also have to realize is who is defining the accomplishments, and it has to be across all ethnicities, all socioeconomic groups. It needs to have some thought. It needs to be a little intentional. I'm not saying we need to, dilute everything, but it take into account it's not going to be everybody's experience. So we need to be intentional with what we name. We name it.
And that's a fair point, because in this country we think everything revolves around us, and maybe this isn't even a topic for somebody in Europe or
right,
whatever. But so I think we're creating the framework, and that idea of let's not label the time frame that we're growing up, or put on a label until we've experienced something, or there's, like you said, some natural thing that happened, or a way to group it. And again, I think 9/11 kids, right? There's certainly, those are some major events that I think in our history as Americans we can understand. What I think that gives us a better sense of what that group is all about.
Right.
And so that's kind of the conversation. It's 15 after. I want to take a little break, and we appreciate you listening to The Works. Welcome back to The Works. Before we left, you took a little break. We were discussing the concept or creating a framework around naming generations better, or at least having some experience of what that generation is before they get the name or the official name or the last name, if you will. And before the break, well, like I said, we were talking about how each current name for a generation, we'll pick the baby boomers first, right? There are certain things about the baby boomers that made them the baby boomers, right?
Right. It was the everybody was procreating when they came back from war, and that's where the description left. They're boomers. Now, there are other adjectives I might use for that generation.
Well, and so for it, and which that one actually makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
But again, that name was given after the generation had. Remember this book you talked about 1991, right? So
right.
Baby boomers had already been placed, experienced. They're
and 30 years old at least.
And so exactly, and the fact that if you look at just the basic history, that the war was over, and then there was a statistic that when everyone came back from war,
they made babies.
Call them baby boomers. Now, does that title really depict who they are? Because I think one of the things that, personally, as a Gen Xer, these baby boomers are taking everything from us Gen Xers,
all the resources,
all from a Social Security perspective,
mm-hmm.
right? That means, and again, I hate not that I want the conversation to go political, but part of what they contributed, right? Well, actually, that's the rub. They're going to get more out of the system that they put into it, but I don't want to, I don't want to focus on that. So back to the idea of baby boomers now are becoming of age to start collecting Social Security,
mm-hmm.
and again, we know that baby boomers also have they have a big chunk proportionately of how many people there are in that age group.
Right.
Right.
Now, interesting side note, millennials actually have a bigger swath of the population than boomers.
Well, and why is that?
I don't know. That was just...
And millennials are, forgive me, what was the...
Millennials born 1981 to 1996.
And they're the biggest group. Of course, I guess if you think about it, the things that we've been hearing in the media for the last 20 years that people are waiting longer to have kids.
Right.
There's always been that concern that the kids of older parents
mm-hmm.
are a bubble off because the eggs are old and et cetera, et cetera. But that generation, which was really the direct result of the boomers.
Mm-hmm.
So the boomers' kids are having a lot of kids or had a lot of kids, right?
Right. And it spanned Gen X to maybe some millennials.
Okay, so to your point, they're like baby boomer redone or baby boomers 2. And our baby boomers, we're
right.
thinking of relabeling them just because that they're turning of age where now most of the boomers have retired or about to retire or
mm-hmm.
Okay.
So if you think about it, the very last of the boomers were born in 1964. So they are now 62?
Okay. So to your point that the last ones are starting to finally turn of age
right.
to declare themselves retired or quit their day job and
mm-hmm.
go work at Walmart as a greeter. But okay, but we were talking about attributes. So attributes of baby boomers, outside of the fact that they were part of that generation that mom and dad made a lot of kids because they came home from the war.
Mm-hmm.
What else can we call, or do we know enough about boomers to maybe relabel them? Or do we move on to our generation, which is Gen X, and try to come up with a better name for Gen X?
Well, I guess one of the things I would comment on the boomers is that they were part of the counterculture of the 60s. So, when you call somebody, okay, boomer, you just immediately think of somebody old when then you realize that they were the first, middle finger to the government.
So you're saying that the drug, sex, rock and roll generation are
Mhm.
boomers.
Yeah.
Okay. So the
Funny to think of that, huh?
free love and all that, burn your bras and
Mm.
so that's the boomers.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And now, well, of course, it kind of makes sense now that you put it in perspective that the boomers are the ones that had the most kids because, let's face it, they were having drug, sex, and rock and roll. But so if we had to rename the boomers based on their attributes, part of what you're saying is that they were the first rebellious. They didn't want to go to Vietnam, right?
No.
Were you saying no because I'm wrong, or are you saying
No, they did
that-
not want to go to Vietnam. Many of them did fight, and there was social discourse
and ran off to Canada, but we had the draft back then as well,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
So unlike their parents, that came
the-
from the generation that actually went to war for this country,
Mhm.
regardless of their political opinions,
Right.
on foreign soil, the boomers, if anything, drug, sex, rock and roll, didn't want anything to do with that.
Mm-mm.
And now are probably the biggest drain on what money is left in the Social Security system for the rest of us,
Right, because they're no longer contributing; they're drawing.
and have been.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So let's put a pin in the boomers
Yeah.
for a minute, because it's overcomplicating the notion of, see, again, this is why it's interesting, that the idea of having a simple 2 or 3 words to describe an entire generation really doesn't do it justice. I mean,
No.
the history that's there. But in a way now, you've almost sold me on the idea of Gen X, because that idea is independence,
Mhm.
right? There's a lot you could read into that. Whereas a baby boomer, again, the definition is just figurative. I mean, it's literal that they were part of the generation that parents made kids,
Right.
right? But Gen X, like I said,
Mhm.
let's put a pin on with Gen X, the idea is that we were the first independent sort of we grew up in, this is where divorce became a thing, right? Why suffer through a miserable marriage and relationship? Let's divorce. The introduction of weekend dads and et cetera, et cetera.
Right, and moms working outside of the home. He had a previous generation burning bras, and we're all about empowering women, and that was a good thing. Women entered the workforce. However, that also brought us to the latchkey kids, which I was one. Yeah, it was a thing. We had to figure it out. So maybe instead of Gen X, we were the independent generation. We were.
And how did that? And I think what's kind of interesting, the way you're summing this up, in a way, what we should consider. So the framework is reevaluating the name of the generation, and the attributes that or the milestones that occurred during that generation, and like with boomers, one of the things that, yes, they came from a solid home,
Mhm.
right? If again, I'm not saying that single parents aren't solid homes, but they came from a 2-parent home.
Mhm.
Whereas Gen X, proportionately, that wasn't the case, or at least that started to swing the other way.
Right.
More single parents.
Right. And not to jump ahead, but that's why Gen X, when they decided to have kids, they became the helicopter parents.
exactly, and
participation awards for the millennial kids. So everything skips a generation.
that makes it hard to look back now
Mhm.
with everything that we've kind of talked about, and it's not that I'm not convinced that we need better labels for our generations, and I'm not convinced that 20 years, the time span, that seems to me too big of a time span for labeling one group of people.
Right.
Um,
And Gen X, they only gave us 15 years.
so, and why is that?
I don't know.
Cocaine? All the cocaine that Gen X people did?
Well, it was the me generation, I
right,
guess.
the selfish.
Yeah. We achieved. We spent money.
Or Crystal Pepsi.
Yeah.
That came back to,
yeah.
yeah. There's nothing wrong with the dyes, but
Or New Coke. The New Coke generation.
so that's interesting. With the previous and then the subsequent generations, are they still 15 years? They're not 15, right? They're what, 20?
No, some were more
It
than
just depends.
were more than 20, some were 24, some were 25. Yeah, it's just bizarre. Gen X is 15, millennials are 15.
Well, so again, as we're peeling back the layers of this conversation, we started out, in my mind,
And who decides?
well, that's just it. Like you said, the history is there was a book written
Mm-hmm.
about the greatest generation,
Mm-hmm.
and that, in a way, well, that inadvertently defined the greatest generation.
Right. And then there was Neil Howe and William Strauss. They did a 1991 study called Generations, which put all this talk on the map. But who's to decide how many years a generation gets? Although, I'm going to step on my soapbox. It isn't about I hate to say about these newer generations of which some are quite grown-ups out there, that they don't stop to think about what they're reading, what they're consuming. They just, I read it somewhere, which I quoted earlier, I read it, but there's no thought behind it. They're just, it is what it is. They don't question that it should be more years, less years. It just is.
So, okay. So to your point, maybe another attribute goes into how does that generation deal or interface with other generations? Maybe again, if we have a checklist or a scorecard on how to ascertain the attributes of a generation, I think for certain, again, maybe it's cliche, nobody above the age of 70 should have any technology, right? They should not own a smartphone, right?
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
But and so my point, back to what you were just talking about, Gen X, though, we were the first ones to experience technology, and yet we're probably the worst on technology today with the social media grind that exists. Well, no, think about it, okay? I personally could not handle having a social media account.
You hated it, but
hated it. I just
you don't see the point.
Well, no, if you're wearing your heart on your shoulder, sleeve, whatever the cliche, chip, you become, you're so sensitive to what everyone's comments are that it makes that's why to me ignorance is bliss. Don't want to be part of it,
Right. It's back to grade school slam books. But you've noticed when we've been out to dinner that there are people that are Gen X that are busy on their phone looking at social media while they're at dinner. They'd rather look at what other people are doing than actually experiencing.
Sure. But you also take a survey of the table. Are they all Gen Xers? Do they have their kids with them? Most likely they don't have kids with them. They're by themselves and they're on a date night, but yet they've isolated themselves because
they can't handle it either. I'm sorry, nobody can handle social media. It's awful.
But
that's another podcast, the degradation of
agree. No,
of
that
everything
would,
because of
yeah.
social media. People
That-
can't handle it.
that would be a good topic. But so, let's think about it. Gen X is the first true generation to have social media, the technology that we grew up with, that we were thrilled to be a part of, right?
Mhm.
Handheld games, gaming systems. I mean,
Mhm.
technology was a big thing for us. The fact that in school we learned about to program.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I did a computer math course. I loved it.
And so maybe that's why we're so obsessed with it. Is now that we're the ones, because again, I get upset with our kids as an example, not upset with them, but the idea of how much time could be spent just scrolling and moving,
yeah, consuming, not thinking. Yeah.
Yeah, and having that form of your opinion. So yeah, Gen X, again, maybe if we could redefine what Gen X means, is that we were the ones that helped introduce technology, welcome technology,
Mm-hmm.
but at the same time, we're causing our own demise because of the technology.
Right.
We've lost touch.
We embraced it, and
Well, not lose touch, but we let it affect us too much. We
Right.
all we care about is the like.
which doesn't mean anything.
Well, that's to your point. A whole
Views
other
don't
topic.
mean anything.
That's a whole other topic. But so, I think what we've accomplished in this session is
Mhm.
that we've at least given some thought for the folks to help us come up with a framework or an idea of
Right.
renaming generations, not naming the generation before they've had a chance to experience the
right.
generation.
And make sure that we have a footnote, notable things, in the formative years, notable things in their young adult years, and then the result of being an adult after a while. I think it should be, all of that considered.
Very good, very good. So I think that puts a decent wrap on
Gen
at least
I
the
think so.
conversation for now. And,
Yeah.
and again, I think I don't want to go too deep into it. There's certainly what we should do is in our description we can talk about the highlights of what we've proposed,
Mhm.
what input we'd like, and in a future conversation follow up to see especially what you all thought.
Right. And start thinking about the next conversation with millennials, how we would describe those.
Exactly. Very good. And so we appreciate the opportunity to spend some of your time with us and vice versa. And until the next time that we get together, I'm Jim.
I'm Diane.
And you have listened to
The Works.